Chapter 23. Late in the afternoon of the day that marked the disappearance of Paranor from the world of men, the whole of Callahorn, from the Strellerheim south to the Rainbow Lake, was engulfed in heavy autumn rains. The storm swept down through the borderlands, swept across forest and grassland and over the Dragon's Teeth and the Rune, falling at last across the broad expanse of the Rab Plains. It was there that it caught up with Alanon, Brin, and Roan Lee as they journeyed eastward toward the Anar. They camped that night, exposed to the downpour, and huddled within their sodden cloaks, beneath the sparse shelter of an oak broken and ravaged by years of seasons passing. Empty and barren, the Rab stretched away on all sides as the storms thundered overhead, the glare of the lightning revealing in vivid flashes the starkness of the plain. No other life could be found on its cracked and windswept surface. They were all alone. They might have pushed on that night, ridden east until dawn, and thereby gained the Anar before stopping to take their rest. But the Druid saw that the Highlander and the Vale Girl were exhausted, and thought better not to press it. So they stayed that night upon the Rab and rode on again at dawn. The day stretched out to greet them, grey and rain-filled, the sun's light a faint and hazy glow behind the storm clouds that blanketed the autumn skies. They rode east across the plains until they reached the banks of the Rab River, then turned south. When the river branched west out of its main channel, they crossed at a narrows close to the forest's edge and continued south until daylight had slipped into murky, sodden dusk. They spent a second night unsheltered upon the Rab, crouched within cloaks and hoods, with the rain a constant, annoying drizzle that drenched them to the bone and kept them from sleep. The chill of the season settled in about them, while neither cold nor sleeplessness had an apparent effect upon the Druid. It wore with singular perseverance on the stamina of the girl and the Highlander. On Brin, particularly, it began to take its toll. Yet at dawn of the following day she was ready to travel once more, her determination as hard as iron, reforged out of an inner battle she had fought through the empty hours of the night to keep herself sane. The rains that had followed them since their departure out of the Dragon's Teeth were gone, turned now to a soft, feathery mist. The skies were clearing into wisps of whitened clouds as the sunlight began to slip above the forest line. The appearance of the sun rekindled in the vehicle a strength of mind and body that rains in the dark had done much to erode, and she fought valiantly to ignore the exhaustion that seeped through her. Back astride her horse, she turned gratefully toward the warmth of the still hazy sunlight and watched as it crept steadily out of the east. But exhaustion was not so easily dispatched, she found. Though the day brightened as they travelled on, a weariness still persisted deep within, besieging her with doubts and fears that would not fade. Faceless demons darted in their shadows, darted from her mind into the forest they rode beside, laughing and taunting. There were eyes upon her, as there had been within the Dragon's Teeth. There was a sense of being watched, sometimes from far away through eyes that were not bound by any distance. There was an insidious premonition. It had come to her first in the rocks and the shadows of the Dragon's Teeth, following after her, teasing her relentlessly, warning her that she, and those she travelled with, played a game with death they could not win. She had thought it lost after Paranor, for they had escaped the Druid's keep alive and safe. Yet now it was back again, reborn in the grey and wet of the last 2 days, a familiar and haunting demon of her mind. It was evil, and though she sought to drive it from her thoughts with determination and a savage anger, still it would not stay gone. The hours drifted aimlessly away in the course of the third morning's travel, and Brennan's determination gradually began to drift with them. The drifting manifested itself as an inexplicable sense of loneliness, besieged by her premonition, a premonition that her companions could not even recognize. The veil girl began to withdraw into herself. It was done in self-defense to begin with, a withdrawing from the thing that sought to ravage her with its viperous warnings and insidious teasing. Walls came up, windows and doors slammed, and within the shelter of her mind, she sought to close the thing out. But Al-Anon and Roan were closed out as well, and somehow she could not find a way to bring them back in. She was alone, a prisoner within her own self, chained in irons of her own forging. A subtle change began to overtake her. Slowly, inexorably, she began to believe herself alone. Al-Anon had never been close, a distant and forbidding figure, even under the most favourable circumstances. A stranger for whom she could feel pity and for whom she could sense an odd kinship. Yet a stranger nevertheless, impervious and forbidding. It had been different with Ronley, of course, but the Highlander had changed. From her friend and companion he had become a protector, as formidable and unapproachable as the Druid. The sword of Lee had wrought that change, giving to Roan Lee power that made him in his own mind equal to anything that sought to stand against him. Magic, born of the dark waters of the Haechorn and the black sorcery of Al-Anon, had subverted him. The sense of intimacy that had bound them each to the other was gone. It was the Druid to whom Rome was bound now, to whom the kinship belonged. But the drifting of Brin's determination grew quickly beyond her sense of aloneness, became a feeling that somehow, in some way, she had lost her purpose in this quest. It wasn't gone entirely, she knew, yet it had strayed. Once that purpose had been clear and certain, she was to travel into the Eastland through the Anar and the Ravenshorn, to the edge of the pit they call the Malmord, and there descend into that pitch blackened moor to destroy the book of dark magic. The Eldritch, that had been her purpose. But with the passage of time and the dark, cold, and discomfort of their travels, the urgency of that purpose had slipped from her until now seemed distant and tenuous. Al-Anon and Rome were strong and certain, twin irons against the shadows that would stop them. What need had they of her? Could they not act as well as she in this quest? Despite the Druid's word, somehow she felt that they could, that she was not the important member of this company, but almost a burden, a thing not needed. Her usefulness misjudged. She tried telling herself that this was not true, but somehow it was. Her presence was a mistake. She sensed it, and in sensing it grew even more alone. Midday came and went, and the afternoon wore on. The mist of early morning was gone now, and the day had become bright with sunlight. Bits of colour reappeared on the barren plains. The cracked and ravaged earth turned slowly once again to grassland. Brin's sense of aloneness became for a time less oppressive. By nightfall the riders had reached Storlaw, the community of gnome healers, an age-famous village. It was little more than a gathering of modest stone and timber dwellings, settled within the fringe of the woods. It was here that Will Omsford had studied and trained for the profession that he had always sought to follow. Here Al-Anon had come to find him, so he might accompany the Druid on his journey south, to find the chosen Amberley in the quest to preserve the Elkrise and the Elven race. A journey that ended with the infusion of the Elfstone magic into Brin's father, thereby bequeathing to her the power of the Wishsong. It had been more than 20 years ago, Brin thought in sombre, almost bitter reflection. That was how the madness had begun, with the coming of Al-Anon, or the Omsford. That was how it always began. They rode through the tranquil, sleepy village, drawing to a halt behind a large, broad-backed building that served as a centre. The white-robed stores appeared as if they had been waiting for the three to arrive, silent and expressionless. A handful led away the horses, while three more took Brin, Roan, and Al-Anon inside, down dark, shadowed hallways, to separate rooms. Hot baths waited, clean clothes and food, and beds with fresh linens. The store spoke no word as they went about the task of caring for their guests. Like ghosts, they lingered for a few minutes, and then were gone. Alone in her room, Brin bathed, changed, and ate her meal, lost in the weariness of her body and the solitude of her mind. Nightfall, they slipped down across the forest glen, and the shadows passed over the curtained windows, the light of day fading into dusk. The veiled girl watches passing with sleepy, languorous unconcern, given over to the pleasure of comforts she had not enjoyed since leaving the vale. For a time she could almost pretend that she was back again. But when the evening deepened, there came a knock upon the door, and a white-robed store beckoned for her to follow. She went without argument. She knew without asking that Eleanor had called. She found him within his room at the end of the hallway, Roan Lee seated beside him at a small table on which an oil lamp burnt to cast away the night shadows. Wordlessly the Druid beckoned to a third chair, and the Vale girl moved to occupy it. The store who had brought her waited until she was seated, then turned and glided from the room, closing the door softly behind him as he left. The three companions faced one another in silence. Alanon shifted in his chair, dark face, hard and fixed, eyes lost in worlds that the Vale girl and Highlander could not see. He looked old this night, Brin thought, and wondered that it could be so. No one had known Alanon to age, save for her father, and they had come about just before the Druid disappeared from the Four Lands 20 years earlier. Yet now she saw it. He had aged beyond what he had looked when first he had come to the Vale to seek her out. His long dark hair was greyer in its tones, his lean face more lined and time ravished, his look more bent and rough. Time was working against the Druid, even as it worked against them all. The black eyes swept up to meet her own. "I will tell you now, Bremen," he rumbled softly, and the hot gnarled hands folded before him. "Long ago, in the time of the councils of the Druids at Paranor, in the time between the wars of the races, it was Bremen who saw the truth about the coming of the magic. Bronar, who was to become the Warlock Lord, had unlocked the secrets years before and fallen prey to their power. Consumed by what he had hoped to master, the rebel Druid became a slave. After the first war of races, the council believed him destroyed, yet Bremen saw that it was not so. Bronar lived, preserved by the magic, driven by its force and its need. The sciences of the old world were gone, lost in the holocaust of the great wars. Their place was reborn, the magic of a world older still. A world in which only fairy creatures had existed. It was this magic, Bremen saw, that would preserve or destroy the new world of men. Thus, Bremen defied the council as Bronar had before him, yet with greater care for what he was about, began to learn for himself the secrets of the power that the rebel Druid had unlocked. Prepared for the Warlock Lord's eventual return, he saved himself when all the other Druids were destroyed. Became his mission, the sole and fixed purpose of his life, to regain the power that the evil one had let loose, to recapture it and seal it away where it could not again be tampered with. No easy task, yet a task to which he pledged himself. The Druids had unlocked the magic now. As the last of those Druids, it was left to him to unlock it away once more. Alanon paused. He chose to do this through the creation of the sword of Shannara, a weapon of ancient elven magic that could destroy the Warlock Lord and the bearers of the skulls that served him. In the darkest hour of the second war of the races, with the whole of the Four Lands threatened by the armies of the Evil One, Bremen forged from magic and from the skills he had acquired and the knowledge he had gained the fabled sword. He gave it to the Elven King, Shannara, with the sword. With that sword, the king would face in battle the rebel Druid and see him destroyed. As you know, however, Shannara failed. Unable fully to master the power of the sword, he let the Warlock Lord escape. Though the battle was won and the armies of the Evil One driven forth, Still Bronar lived. Years would pass before he could return, but return he would. Bremen knew that he would not be there to face Bronar again, yet his pledge had been given, and Bremen would never forsake a promise. The druid voice had slipped down to a whisper, and there was a look of intense pain within the black, impenetrable eyes. He did 3 things then. He chose me to be his son, the flesh and blood offspring of the druid line, who would walk upon the four lands until the time of the Dark Lord's return. He gave added life to himself first, and to me later, through the sleep that preserves, so that, for as long as might be necessary, a druid would stand as protector of mankind against the Warlock Lord. And finally, he did one thing more. When the time of his passing was at hand, he could not make himself let go. He used the magic in one last, terrible evocation. He bound his spirit to this world in which his body could not stay, so that he could reach beyond life's end to see fulfillment of the pledge that he had made. Gnarled hands tightened into fists. He bound himself, spirit out of flesh, to me. He used the magic to achieve that binding, father to son. His spirit exiled in a dark world where past and future joined, where summons could be had when the need was there. That was what he chose for himself, a lost and hopeless being, never to be freed until it was done, until both had passed. He stopped suddenly, as if his words had brought him farther than he had wished to go. In that instant, Brin caught sight of what had been hidden from her before, a quick, elusive glimpse of the secret that the druid had withheld from her in the valley of Shell, when Bremen had risen from the Hadeshorn and spoken of what was to be, and which gave substance to the whisperings of her premonition. I thought it done once, Eleanor went on, brushing past the sudden pause. I thought it done with sheer Omsford, destroyed the Warlock Lord, when the Valman unlocked the secret of the sword of Shannara and made himself its master. But I was wrong. The dark magic did not die with the Warlock Lord, nor was it locked away as Bremen had forsworn. It must be. It survived, kept safe within the pages of the Old Age, secreted away within the bowels of the Manwood to await new discoverers, and finally the discoverers came. And became the Maud race, Bronley finished, made slaves to the dark magic, as had been the Warlock Lord and the Skullbearers in old days. Thinking to be master, they became only slaves. But what is the secret that you hide? Brim whispered in her mind, still waiting to hear it told. Speak now of that. Then Bremen cannot be freed from his exile within the Hadeshorn until the Book of the Eldach is destroyed, and the magic with it. Rome was too caught up in the history of the tale to see what Brin saw. He is pledged to their destruction, Prince of Lee, Alanon whispered. And you? And you? Brin's mind raced. All of the dark magic had gone from the land. Roan shook his head wonderingly. It does not seem possible, not after so many years of its being, of wars fought because of it, of lives expended. The druid looked away. That age ends, Highlander. That age must pass. There was a long silence then, a hushed stillness that filled the night shadows about the flame of the oil lamp and crowded close about the three who huddled there. Wrapped by it, they thought their separate thoughts, eyes slipping past one another's faces to share what whispered within. Strangers joined in common cause, but without understanding, thought Brin. We strive for a common good, yet the bond is curiously weak. Can we succeed in this, Eleanor? Roan Lee asked suddenly, his wind-burned face turned toward the druid. Have we strength enough to destroy this book and its dark magic? The druid did not answer for a moment. His eyes flickered with hidden knowledge, elusive and quick. Then he said quietly, Brin has the strength. She is our hope. Brin looked at him and shook her head slowly, her smile twisted with irony. Hope and no hope, saviour and destroyer. Remember those words, Elanon? Your father spoke them of me. Elanon said nothing. He simply sat there, dark eyes staring into her own. What else did he tell you, Elanon? She asked him quietly. What else? There was a long pause. That I shall not see him again in this world. The silence deepened. She was close now to the secret of the druid kept hidden. She realized. Roan Lee stirred uneasily in his chair, eyes shifting to find those of the Val girl. There was uncertainty in those eyes, Brin saw. Roan did not want to know any more. She looked away. It was she who was the hope, and she who must know. Was there more? She said. Slowly Elanon straightened, dark robes wrapping close about him, and on his worn and haggard face a smile appeared. There is an Olmsford obsession with knowing the truth of all. That is, he replied. Not a one of you has ever been content with less. What did Bremen say? She pressed. The smile died away. He said, Brin Olmsford, that when I go from the Forelands this time, I shall not come again. Valgirl and Highlander stared at him in shocked belief. As certain as the cycle of the seasons was the return of Elanon to the Forelands, when the danger of the dark magic threatened the races, there had never been a time in memory when he had not come. I don't believe you, Druid, Roan insisted heatedly, unable to think of anything else to say, a trace of outrage in his voice. Elanon shook his head slowly. The age passes, Prince of Lee. I must pass with it. Brin swallowed against the tightness in her throat. When will you? When I must, Brin, the druid finished gently. When it is time. Then he rose, a tall and withered form, as black as night and as steady as its coming. The great gnarled hand reached out across the table without fully understanding why. The Vale girl and the Highlander reached to clasp them in their own, joining for just an instant, the three as one. The druid's nod was brief and somehow final. Tomorrow we ride east into Diana, east until our journey is done. Go now and sleep. Be at peace. The great hands released their own and dropped away. Go, he said softly. With a quick, uncertain glance at each other, Brin and Roan stood up and walked from the room. All the way out, they could feel the dark gaze following after. They walked in silence down the hallway beyond. The sound of voices, distant and fragmented, wafted through the shadows of the empty hall and drifted disembodied from some unforeseen place. The air was thick with the smell of herbs and medicine, and they breathed in the aromas, distracted from their thoughts when they reached the doors to their sleeping rooms. They stopped and stood together, not touching or looking at each other, sharing without speaking the impact of what they had been told. It cannot be true, Brin thought, stunned. It cannot. Roan turned to face her then, and his hands reached down to take hers. For the first time since their departure from the Hadeshorn and the Valley of Shell, she felt close to him again. What he told us, Brin. What he said about not returning. The Highlander shook his head. That was the reason we went to Paranor, and he sealed away the keep. He knew he would not be coming back. Roan, she said quickly and put a finger to his lips. I know. It's just that I cannot believe it. No. For a long moment they stared at each other. "I'm afraid, Brin," he said finally, his voice a whisper. She nodded without speaking, then wrapped her arms about him and held him close. Then she stepped back again, kissed him lightly on the mouth, and disappeared into her room. Slowly, wearily, Alanon turned from the closed door and seated himself once more at the small table. Eyes shifting from the flame of the oil lamp, he stared fixedly into the shadows beyond, his thoughts drifting. Once he would not have felt the need to reveal the secrets that were his. He would have disdained to do so. He was the keeper of the trust, after all. He was the last of the Druids, and the power that had once been theirs belonged now to him. He had no need to confide in others. It had been so with Shea Almsford. Much of the truth had been kept from Shea, left hidden for the little Valmond to discover on his own. It had been so as well with Brin's father when the Druid had taken him in quest of the Bloodfire. Yet Alanon's resolve for secrecy, for deliberate and iron-willed refusal to tell to any, even those closest, all that he knew, had somehow weakened through the years gone past. Perhaps it was the aging come upon him at last, or the inexorable passing of time that weighed so heavily upon him. Perhaps it was simply the need to share that he carried with some other living soul. Perhaps. He rose again from the table, another of night's shadows floating beyond the reach of the light. A sudden breath of air. The oil lamp went dark. He had told so much more to the Vale girl and the Highlander than to any of the others, and still he had not told them all.